My friends, as I mentioned before on this channel, my family's from the Soviet Union. I was born in the Soviet Union, in a place called Lvov, which is now part of Ukraine. We came here in the late 80s, and my parents were dissidents, or what they call refuseniks. It's interesting, guys. When the Soviet government, would catch Jews studying Torah, which they were not allowed to do, they charged them with what? What was the formal charge? The charge was Zionistic activity. Сионистские мероприятия. Learning Torah, right? The KGB even has a whole file, which I read out, about, Zionist, quote-unquote, Zionist subversion of the government, of the country. You notice, guys, what you hear a lot from, like, what I call the Tucker Carlson types and the Joe Rogan types, right? You hear a lot of, like, a lot of these slogans that, the Jews are trying to subvert the country, they're trying to subvert America. Very similar. It's almost as if somebody like Tucker Carlson is literally running what seems to be a Soviet psyop on Americans, or he's trying to, anyway. Like, if I didn't know any better, I think that's what he was doing, right? Just like Candace Owens is literally taking everything from the Protocols of Zion, the book Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which, by the way, was written by somebody in the office or the administration of the Russian Tsar. This is before the Soviet Union. And she's basically just like riffing off the tropes that are in there, right? She's just modernizing everything, using modern parlance and modern concepts, and she's just taking things from today's era and just plugging them into this formula that the Protocols of Zion has set out, which was written, like, we're talking about over 100 years ago, 120 years ago. Which, by the way, guys, is one of the most published books in the Arab world. It's not an accident, guys. So is Mein Kampf, by the way. When the Arab armies attacked Israel in 1967, the government and the media in the Soviet Union kept repeating and repeating and repeating that Israel is the aggressor. I mean, they kind of had, I like to call a half-truth argument. Why? Because Israel saw tanks lined up on their border, and they did a preemptive strike. But obviously we know that Israel knew, it's well documented, that Egypt and Syria and Jordan actually Jordan got pulled into it, but Egypt and Syria wanted to attack. And obviously we know that all these Arab armies experienced FAFO after that, right? And we know that obviously after that, since then they've been demanding that we go back to these the lines that existed, the borders that existed before this war in 1967, right? Folks, the stuff that you're hearing from all these people today about Israel, about what Zionism is, about how Israel, I don't know, is the aggressor, and even though we were attacked and the people who attacked us said they'd do another 10 times, they want to do 10 of these, and 100 of these, and 1,000,000 of these, right? And everybody knows they said it. Everybody knows they said it. Everybody knows they taped it. But folks, this is literally straight out of the Soviet playbook. Nothing more, nothing less. And by the way, the same Soviet Union found this guy, Yasser Arafat, Egyptian guy, and they trained him and they taught him how to basically start a national movement officially. Palestinian nationalism really began with Haj Amin al-Husseini, who became, actually, he was an ally of Hitler. He officially became part of the SS, an SS officer. And, he and Hitler had a plan to do the same thing that Hitler did in Europe with the Jews who were living in the land of Israel. And all the riots that were incited against Jews before the founding of the State of Israel was courtesy of this Haj Amin al-Husseini. He did broadcasts from German radio stations, from Germany. Folks, people don't realize how far this goes. We're talking about something that originated from the Nazis, and then something that was, I always say, it's Nazi foundations and Soviet propaganda, which are really two sides of the same coin, guys. Nazis are not right-wing. They're both quote-unquote left-wing entities, or entities that have become left-wing. And interestingly enough, guys, you have two sides, or two political sides in America who are following, essentially, the ideology of both of these entities. And so, it started with the Haj Amin al-Husseini, and then, finally in the 60s, the Soviets decided that they were going to train this guy to found this nation. And this nation was going to be a weapon, a battering ram, this fake nation called the Palestinians, who are just like literally, a combination of like different tribes from different nation states, from different Arab nation states. And all the stuff you're hearing, folks, like when my parents and I started hearing this stuff, and anybody in my community, the former Soviet Jewish community, started hearing all these slogans that we hear today, we're just like literally like, we thought we left the Soviet Union. And here we are in America, and we're hearing this stuff, and it's just like, we know where it comes from. And this is new to a lot of people, right? We know where it comes from. We were telling you about this guy named Obama, right? Who was essentially repeating this stuff. Guys, again, lest you forget, I will remind you, he asked Bibi, not that I'm a big fan of Bibi, to go back to the 1967 lines, my friends. He essentially asked Bibi to reverse the FAFO that the Arabs brought on themselves. As we know, they didn't want to live in peace. So, my friends, we can conclude that at the very least, since 2008, America has been infiltrated by the same ideology that created the so-called quote-unquote Palestinian nation. And now we're in a situation where we have people on both sides of the political spectrum, so to speak, repeating stuff from Protocols of Zion, repeating Soviet slogans, and we now have a horseshoe. It's a political horseshoe where these people are almost like uniting. They're not actively uniting. They are just coming to the same crossroad. They're arriving at the same point. They're meeting each other at the same point, without intending to. At least that's what it seems like. And so, my friends, trust us when we tell you, the former Soviet Jews, this all came from somewhere. And now you ask the question, Tzvi, how do we solve this? How do we reverse this? Well, you got to do what Trump is doing now. You got to take away money from these universities. You got to defund these people, right? It starts in the universities. Really, under Obama, it started in high school. By the time these kids get to college, they're already cooked, right? They get a primer in high school, and then they get to college, and then they get like what's called the source material, right? Take away the funding, because all the funding, my friends, in high schools, a lot of the funding comes from Qatar, much less the colleges, right? That's the first step. The main step, my friends, is just to be aware where this comes from. It's nothing new. It's nothing that came out of nowhere. Protocols of Zion, Mein Kampf, Haj Amin al-Husseini, the KGB, Arafat. And now we have Tucker Carlson. Now we have Candace Owens. Now we have Nick Fuentes. Now we have Jake Shields, right? Now we have also Linda Sarsour, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. Folks, there are more names, I can go on. But these people are just, they're like the outgrowth of something that's been around for at least 100 years. Even more. They didn't invent anything new, my friends. This is just a remix. That's all it is, guys. So, you take away their money. You can't take away their ideology. You can't rewire their brain, but you can take away their money. You take away their money, you take away their power. Because, my friends, if that doesn't happen, the Jews are going to have to figure out how to either arm themselves, or if you can't, or if you're not able to because of where you live, what's the state you live in, the part of the country you live in, maybe it's time to come home. Alright, guys. This Soviet Jew signing off. Talk to you soon.